The blade of the guillotine descends instantly, transforming a live human into dead flesh for thousands to stare in awestruck horror. This death apparatus created an execution, a mass spectacle in the public view as people ridiculed, collapsed, or gawked mutely by witnessing immediate justice. The guillotine witnessing meant peeping over the lip where civilization ends and savagery begins, where an iron sound signifies the end of human life. Those who saw a head drop into the basket at the foot of the scaffold never forgot what they had seen, the moment when justice, power, and death were blended in a dreadful instant. In the 18th and 19th centuries, executions served not only as punishment but also as public events involving thousands of onlookers eager to witness justice being meted out. The guillotine was no exception. No longer in France, particularly in the Reign of Terror, 1793 to 1794, were executions not daily occurrences carried out in crowded squares like the Place de la Révolution in Paris. Crowds started gathering long before the execution. Some were already on hand before dawn to secure good positions. Street vendors sold snacks and souvenirs, turning the serious business into a carnival atmosphere. This was an attraction. To others, it was a sad reminder of the revolution's power. One observer, Charles-Édouard Lefebvre, described the scene in his diary of 1793. The square was crowded shoulder to shoulder, with men climbing on rooftops and hanging from windows. Children balanced on their fathers' shoulders, women waved fans in the hot summer air, and vendors called prices for wine, bread, and even little wooden models of the machine itself. It seemed as if the entire city of Paris had come out to celebrate a holiday, not to witness death. The social strata in the crowd were actual. The wealthy sat on balconies or behind the National Guard protection lines while plebs filled the space below. The aristocrats had to stand there and observe compatriot aristocrats being decapitated, a grim warning that they would also soon have their necks on the blade. Witnessing a guillotine execution was not for the faint of heart. The speed of the blade and the horrific sight of the severed head were shocking. Some applauded, while others blanched, their eyes wide with horror. But one thing was sure. Once you had witnessed it, you never forgot I-7. The psychological effect on witnesses, despite the popular backing, witnessing a death, even that of an enemy of the state, was deeply psychologically affecting. Eyewitness accounts describe people fainting, vomiting, or even becoming physically ill after watching the execution. The famous writer Victor Hugo, even though he witnessed an execution much later in the 19th century, described this psychological impact. "I still shudder at the awful shock of seeing this legalized murder. I came home wavering like a drunken man, my senses stunned, my mind confused and slept badly, haunted by the memory of the moment when the head fell from the body." Some bystanders reported recurring nightmares of the guillotine. A few had dreamed they were the victim, having felt the cold wood against their neck before waking in a cold sweat. Doctors at the time documented cases of the so-called guillotine sickness, a form of trauma manifesting as insomnia, anxiety, and physical illness caused by witnessing executions. For some, the experience was traumatic. There were reports of people having nightmares or breaking down emotionally after witnessing several executions. In several cases, even veteran executioners admitted being disturbed by their role in the proceeding. Upper-class women would sometimes attend executions as a test of their courage and stoicism. Women who could watch without flinching or fainting were admired for their strength, and those who were too distraught to cope were often derided. This strange social pressure created another layer of psychological sophistication for the spectacle. Yet other revolutionaries saw the guillotine as an essential instrument of justice. They viewed it as a purging force, clearing out the old regime and killing traitors. But even among them, there were whispers in private. What if they fell under the blade one day? The executioner was a feared and respected figure. The most famous of them in France was Charles-Henri Sanson, who officiated at thousands of beheadings during the French Revolution. He was a professional, precise, methodical, and oddly calm amidst carnage. The position of executioner was often hereditary, passed from father to son over generations. The Sanson family served as executioners in France for nearly 2 centuries, with Charles-Henri being the most notorious. Despite their grim profession, they were well compensated and held a strange place in society, simultaneously essential and outcast. Executioners wore distinctive uniforms and performed their jobs with rehearsed efficiency. They typically operated in teams, so the execution went like clockwork. One would lead the condemned to the guillotine, another would pin down their body, and a third would operate the lever that released the blade. The precision required was enormous. A mistake would mean a botched execution, a partial beheading that would necessitate multiple drops of the blade. Such failures were rare but gruesome when they occurred, and the crowd would turn on the executioner with shouts and even physical attacks. Charles-Henri Sanson recorded in his memoirs, "I do not take pleasure in my work. I merely execute the orders of the law. When I pull the lever, I do not see an enemy or a friend, just a job to be performed as quickly and as perfectly as possible." His son, Henri, his assistant and successor, reportedly was an alcoholic and depressed, not able to reconcile his role in so many deaths. Despite their grim business, executioners were not murderous monsters. Most believed themselves to be public servants, fulfilling the dictates of the law. Nevertheless, some executioners were emotionally scarred, haunted by the faces of the men whom they had killed. One of the most unsettling aspects of a guillotine execution was the demeanor of the victim. Some prisoners approached their deaths with stolid resignation, but others screamed, wept, or tried to struggle. The journey to the scaffold was an ordeal in itself. The condemned were typically led in open carts through jeering crowds, subject to insult and even physical attack by bystanders. By the time they reached the guillotine, most were already broken in spirit, though some maintained their dignity to the end. Before the drop of the blade, the condemned had personal items taken away. Their hair was cut to ensure a clean cut, and they were strapped onto the machine. Their hands were typically bound behind their backs, and occasionally they were permitted to utter their last words. The brutality of the preparation was physical. The victim would be bound to a hinged board, which would then be pushed forward horizontally, placing their neck directly beneath the blade. The head would be locked into a lunette, a wooden collar that restricted movement, so there would not impede the blade's trajectory. The most famous final words were those of Marie Antoinette, the deposed Queen of France. When she stepped onto the scaffold, she accidentally stepped on the executioner's foot and said, "Pardon me, sir. I did not do it on purpose." Her head fell into the basket seconds later. Some prisoners, especially during the height of the Reign of Terror, were defiant to the end, taunting their executioners or shouting revolutionary slogans until the blade silenced them for good. The poet André Chénier, executed in 1794, recited lines of his verse until the blade fell. The chemist Antoine Lavoisier is said to have asked for a stay of execution to complete an experiment and to have been informed by the judge that the Republic does not need scientists. The victims themselves often exhibited what witnesses described as la beauté de la mort, a strange calm or clarity that took hold of them in their final moments. Some attributed it to shock or resignation, but others saw it as a final dignity in the face of inevitable death. One of the most frightening arguments surrounding the guillotine is whether the decapitated head was conscious. Some scientists and witnesses claimed a head could live for a few seconds, even attempting to speak or react. This gruesome question captivated revolutionary France's medical community. Although he did not invent the device, Dr. Joseph Ignace Guillotine, for whom it would later be named, believed that death from it was instantaneous and painless. Nonetheless, many of his colleagues remained skeptical. Several experiments were conducted to test this theory. In one case, a doctor called to a freshly severed head and said that he saw its eyes respond before vanishing. Other accounts mention lips moving, faces twisting, or eyelids flickering following decapitation. One of the most notorious accounts is from Dr. Séguret, who observed the execution of a murderer named Languille in 1905. His medical examination report noted, "The eyes of Languille clearly opened and looked at me with consciousness. After several seconds, the eyelids closed again. I called out again, and once more, my eyelids lifted, and two eyes looked at me with attention. Then, the eyelids closed once more, but less completely. This account sent shockwaves through the medical community and the public. Other executioners also claimed to have felt such disturbing phenomena as well. Henri Sanson proclaimed that he witnessed decapitated heads twist if their cheeks were slapped. A different executioner testified that he saw a head attempt to speak after being shown to the population. The debate spilled into France. Les Gaulois, in Germany, conducted tests on beheaded animals, concluding to discover proof of consciousness moments after decapitation. England saw the Royal Society publish pieces debating whether the guillotine was truly humane in light of these gruesome stories. Whereas science today indicates consciousness would probably begin to disappear in seconds from the loss of blood and lack of oxygen, speculation that the executioners and bystanders alike found themselves haunted by was that perhaps the condemned men were conscious, at least for an instant. The chilling prospect tainted what was to be a civilized execution by turning it arguably more gruesome than the practices that preceded it. The guillotine needed to be cleaned after each execution. Blood was on the blade, the wooden stand, and the ground below it. Workers tidied up the mess quickly, but the stain of death could not be erased. On multiple execution days, the atmosphere grew more gruesome. The basket to catch the heads would become full and need to be emptied between executions. The earth under the scaffold became bloody mud, and the smell of iron and death clung in the air. During the height of the terror, when scores a day were being guillotined, cleaning was best described as automatic. Executioners worked with arms smeared with blood, and the wooden boards of the guillotine irretrievably became stained after they had been cleaned repeatedly. The blade quickly wore out, requiring frequent sharpening to remain functional. The machine itself had become an object of terror. It was considered by some to be haunted, and in the decades that followed, even proponents of capital punishment were uneasy with the guillotine. There were superstitions regarding the machine. Some believed it was bad luck to touch the wood, some that viewing the guillotine in action would give one protection against violent death. Eventually, executions became a matter of private occurrence. The final public guillotine execution was that of Eugène Weidmann in France in 1939, where he was outside the Saint-Pierre prison in Versailles. The execution had drawn such a large and riotous crowd, estimates go up to several thousand, that officials finally deemed it necessary to conduct all ensuing executions behind the prison walls. The final guillotine execution in history took place in 1977 when Hamida Jandoubi was executed in Marseille for torturing and killing his girlfriend. By this time, the show had been removed from the public gaze, but the psychological impact remained for those few official spectators who were compelled to witness it. Over time, the morality of public executions came under question. What was perceived as justice came to be regarded as state brutality. The shift in popular opinion was not sudden but incremental. In the 19th century, reformers and philosophers started to decry not only the guillotine, but also capital punishment in general. Victor Hugo's best-selling novel, The Last Day of a Condemned Man, 1829, made readers feel sorry for a man on death row and doubt the morality of the death penalty. Newspapers started reporting more critical descriptions of executions, highlighting the psychological pain of the executed and the dubious utility of public executions as a crime deterrent. Execution photographs, which first appeared in the late 19th century, brought the reality of the guillotine to those who had never seen it, further shifting public opinion. Physicians increasingly questioned the supposed humaneness of the guillotine. The debate over post-decapitation consciousness particularly tormented the popular imagination, with individuals questioning whether this modern procedure was more humane than hanging or other forms of execution. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, France and other European nations began moving executions behind closed doors. The spectacle was no longer welcome in modern society. France's decision to conduct executions privately after 1939 reflected this changing sentiment. The public's appetite for witnessing death had diminished significantly. In 1981, with President François Mitterrand, France formally abolished the death penalty, and the reign of the guillotine was finally brought to an end. The last guillotine ever used in France now sits in a museum, a reminder of a justice system that once believed quick death was the best deterrent. Although it was created as a merciful means of capital punishment, the guillotine became the symbol of tyranny and terror. It is also a symbol of the highest ideals of justice and fear of political cleansing. The guillotine was a paradox, a device created for the cause of equality, all the condemned having the same humane death regardless of class, that became the very symbol of inequality as political factions executed their enemies in great numbers. The French Revolution was a paradox in this regard, beginning with lofty ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity, and descending into the bloodlust excesses of the Terror. Its effectiveness was both its advertising and its horror. It industrialized murder during the era of industrialization in Europe, and it made it possible to kill dozens in the morning with little effort. This capital punishment mechanization prefigured the more systematic atrocities of the 20th century. Historians continue to debate the guillotine's role during revolutionary France and European politics. Some argue the public spectacle of executions galvanized revolutionary opposition, while others view them as sealing revolutionary power by terror. Its psychological impact upon French society overall, seeing thousands beheaded over the years, most likely helped endear Napoleon's authoritarian rule later as a less objectionable choice than revolutionary disorder. The guillotine also changed our minds about punishment and justice. The debate over whether quick death is humane continues in modern arguments over the means of capital punishment. The guillotine forced society to confront uncomfortable questions. Is there a humane execution? Should the state be allowed to take a life? Does public punishment deter crime or simply brutalize society? The sight of the falling blade was unforgettable for those who witnessed it. And even today, the legacy of the guillotine is one of history's most chilling reminders of justice, power, and the thin line between civilization and savagery. The guillotine is history's most efficient instrument of death, constructed for mercy but remembered for horror. Those who witnessed its blade fall away took the sight with them to the end of their days, a macabre reminder of human cruelty and mortality. The guillotine remains an evocative symbol today of the way justice can devolve into brutality and how close the line between civilization and barbarism is. Looking back at this chapter of bloodied history, we cannot help but ask ourselves, have we indeed advanced or merely hidden our most primal urges beneath more pleasing disguises?